Hello, welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I am Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan.
And we post a video every Friday, so do hit subscribe if you want to know what our continuing adventure might be so that you too can become a horticulturalist like Mr. Ryan.
Yes, well, let's hope there's a lot of us out there eventually. And don't forget that we also have shorts on a Monday. So if in fact you've got a question you'd like to ask me, put it in the comments below and we will try and answer it in 60 seconds, or at least I will.
You will, I won't. I'll just read the question. That's the limit of my skill and talent. Now, all the plants that we name and show in this film are listed in the text below. And if you can't see it, just click read more and you'll see the whole list down there.
Yeah, so don't panic if you can't read it on the screen quickly enough.
Now, Stephen, it's a brisk autumnal day here in Mount Macedon. What are we going to talk about?
We're going to talk about a climbing plant
Yes.
that lots of people have a passion for.
Yes.
And I'm now going to do the reveal. It is Lapageria rosea, the Chilean Bell Flower.
Look at that, and look at the size of those flowers.
Aren't they stunning?
They are enormous.
And if you look really closely, look at those wonderful speckly spotty bits inside.
Now I'd never seen this before until I came to your nursery and saw, look how they hang, and saw them growing here. And you've got so many. Now it is mid-autumn and basically they're all in bloom, aren't they, at the moment? So what we're going to do is look at, well, in fact, well, we won't reveal that, but anyway, we're going to look at them all and learn all you need to know about Lapageria. Now, we've actually mentioned Lapageria before, I think twice, in Unusual Climbers and in Chilean Plants. So we've got two videos that briefly touch on it, but it's such a beautiful plant, we've decided to make a whole film on it. And
We
in
had
fact,
to come back.
We were sitting here because the white one, which we can just perhaps see through there, was
this
covered
fine
in
white
flowers
flower.
this time last year. But, so let's start from the beginning.
All right.
What is it? Where is it from? Tell us everything, Stephen.
All right. Well, Lapageria rosea is, of course, its botanical name.
Yep.
Lapageria is named after the Empress Josephine. That was her maiden name.
I was going to say, Lapageria Josephine, I don't get it. But
Yeah, no, it was her maiden name,
Okay.
was Lapageria.
right.
Rosea, of course, means rose-coloured, so red, and the wild form is, in fact, red.
Exhibit
not-
A,
yeah,
white, but
yeah.
we'll get to that.
Yeah, anyhow. It comes from central southern Chile, from fairly damp rainforest conditions, and I have actually stood in a forest with live fair dinkum wild Lapagerias,
Have you?
and some were in flower, so another one of those ticked off things that
For
I'm...
some, that
yeah,
might
for
be on some people's bucket list.
well,
Not many,
It
Stephen.
was on mine, so it was one of the things. I had to stand in a forest with Lapageria, and I had to stand in a forest with monkey puzzles with snow all over them.
Okay.
And I did both.
And meet Beyonce. At
No,
the same time.
I didn't do that either, but anyhow. So, yeah, so we know where the name comes from. It's the national floral emblem of Chile. It's known by all and sundry there as Capiwi, which is the name that was given by the Indian tribes that lived in that area. So
Right.
it's of the local colloquial name.
So can I ask, is it only found in Chile?
Yes.
Endemic to that?
Yes, it's
spot
it's
of the world?
definitely Chile. It doesn't extend over the Andes into Argentina. It is just Chilean. And Capiwi, by the way, means upside down mouth.
All right.
Yeah, so you can sort of see that because it hangs with its
Hangs.
mouth gaping. So there you go. So Capiwi means upside down mouth. Look at that. Yeah, it's great. So there's only the one species. It's in a very small family that only has a handful of other genera in it, and they're nearly all monocarpic as far as, monotypic I should say, as far as I know, because the other genus that's well known in this family that grows also in Chile is a little creepy plant called a Felicia, and they've actually created a hybrid between the two, but that's another story.
That's Frankenstein
yeah,
work.
Yeah, so there you go. So Chilean floral emblem, Capiwi is its local name,
Yeah.
and it is loved and adored by all and sundry in Chile. And you see its image on everything from matchboxes to goodness knows what else.
Yeah.
All right, now this plant behind me is
Yes.
just a selected white seedling, so it's not a named form, so it would go under the name of Lapageria rosea Alba.
Yeah.
And it's got very pretty but comparatively small white trumpets on it.
Yeah.
And the plant here has been in the garden there since around about 1986 or 7.
Wow, okay.
And it has worked its way up into the arbutus tree above, but it's just this thin, wispy, attractive climber. But some of the selected forms are far superior to that.
Yes.
But I might add, when I bought that plant,
Yes.
way back in the
80s.
in the 80s, way back then, They were selling at the time as a known white, and they had to raise the seedlings up, get them to flower, to check that they had a white. They were charging $50 for them back then.
In the 80s?
In the 80s, they were $50 each. So
a fortune. Did you pay $50?
Yeah, I think so. I don't remember exactly. I
Or
might have got it at wholesale, but even so, they were very expensive, and I know I was selling white ones way back then at about that sort of price bracket. So if anything, they're actually cheaper now than they ever were before.
Yeah.
And in a very few and selected places, we have a range to select from.
Okay.
So that hideously expensive, lovely little white flowered one there
Yep.
leads us into some of the different floral shapes and colours that we get in Lapageria. And so we're going to have a look at a superior white one.
Let's go and look at that. Stephen, I'm speechless.
Yes.
It is so beautiful.
Now you can see why it's the Chilean floral emblem, can't you? It's
So-
just stunning.
This one sort of, I don't know, it's like it's been dipped in crimson dye.
Yes, yes. This is one of the bicolours. There's a
Yes.
number of them.
Yeah.
And this is one called Colibri, which I think is the name of a hummingbird or something like that. I did find out at one stage from somebody what a colibri was.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so this is one of the bicolours. And when you consider that the wild form, which is the cherry red one, was the only species, and none of these are hybrids, they're all ones that have been found in the wild as just variant forms of the original species.
I see.
And I believe the nursery where they were all collected in southern Chile reckoned they had 69 distinctly different forms of Lapageria, all from the one original species.
So what's going on there? Is it just very, like dahlias, very mutable, or is it about the pollinators? What's going on?
Well, I think what's going on is, in fact, that there's always been the opportunity for Lapageria to throw different flower colours, although I have to say it's not as genetically predisposed as, say, a dahlia is. I mean, dahlias can throw all sorts of things, but the issue is to find them. And so they actually sent out collectors into the wild looking for any Lapageria they could find that was different from the classical form. And it did. Unfortunately, I've lost at least one of the varieties I originally got. There was a double one, so there was one with sort of like a hose-in-hose trumpet inside a trumpet one called Killer Pitchum, which I'm very sad that I lost. And there's the bicolours, there's the shades of pink, there's the whites, there's the bigger flowered ones, the smaller flowered ones, there's the very dark ones. So there's this whole range of colours, and nobody in Chile certainly has been doing anything in the way of breeding. They've just been selecting them out of the wild. But certainly in Europe, particularly in England, there's been a few selections made over the years, but again, probably just selections from seed that turned out to be different from the original parent plant and have been named.
So a few observations. Firstly, the flowers are very waxy and quite strong,
Yeah.
and the leaves feel really tough.
Yeah, they're very hard, the leaves.
Because looking at it, you think, oh, you just look at it and it will snap. But it's a really tough plant. These leaves are also gorgeous.
Tough by nature, but not by disposition, because I guess they're not that easy to grow in lots of different climates.
Yeah.
They are a prima donna. They need just the right conditions in all different ways.
We'll get to that in a minute. All right, well, let's just go and learn a little bit more about their prima donna-ness. 'Cause
Yes.
I can see a beautiful white one just over there.
All right, what a good idea. Well, Matthew, do you like pure virginal white? Because here we have the most beautiful white Lapageria.
I have to say, I find it incredible that you said that this is all one species.
Yes, all Lapageria rosea.
And they're all so different. I mean, the flower shape and size is basically the same, but I wish you could feel this, viewers.
It's like wax.
It feels like wax. It feels so artificial. It's unlike anything.
And you can make a fortune out of these white ones for bridal work, believe it or not, for bridal bouquets. So there you go.
Well, there's a quick question, and then what we're going to talk about now is general care. But how long do these flowers stay on the vine?
All right, well, they're late summer, autumn flowering as
Yeah.
a rule, but you can get odd spontaneous flowers almost year round.
Yeah.
You never have them absolutely dripping with flowers, or very rarely, because they have such an incredibly long flowering period. The individual flower on the vine, without being picked, will generally last for about 3 to 4 weeks, so nearly a month out of
Wow.
any given flower. So they have quite a good longevity, and if they're picked, they can stay in good condition for at least 24 hours before they start to wilt.
Wow. And given their size, I guess it doesn't matter that it's not covered in them because they're so striking. The other thing just on this branch here is the
some
buds,
buds
are really beautiful. And actually this has got, what, 3 buds, 4
Oh
buds?
yeah, there's a number of flowers still to come on this particular one.
Yeah.
Now this isn't just a normal white one though.
Okay.
You do get what has been sold around the traps as Lapageria rosea Alba, which is a bit of weird mixed metaphors or whatever going on there. And the white Lapageria was always the holy grail to get.
Yes, yes.
This is an extra large flowered white one, and it's again one of the ones that was selected in South America from the wild.
Yep.
And it's a cultivar called Toqui. And again, I don't know what the name actually means.
No.
Some of the names come from Spanish, some of the names come from South American Indian words, but this one's an extra long, slender trumpeted white called Toqui.
All right, let's talk basic care then.
Yes.
Talk us through, because you said it's a prima donna.
It
How
is.
and why?
All right. Well, for a start, they need the right aspect.
Yeah.
They like plenty of light, but no direct sun. Really important. I stress that. That was all done in capital letters.
Okay.
So plenty of light, no direct sunlight. The roots need to be certainly right down in cool, damp, moist soil without being wet. So there is a difference between being moist and being wet.
Yes.
So just moist soil all year round. They like an acidic soil, so they're not happy in alkaline soils, and they like a soil that's very rich in humus, because in the wild they grow in the forests in southern Chile, and they grow underneath the trees, and then they wind themselves up and through the trees.
I was going to ask its native habitat. So, like many creepers, then but this isn't looking for the sun actually.
No, it generally stays below the canopy.
Right.
In the area they grow, though, it's got very high rainfall, doesn't see the sun terribly often anyway. So even if it did poke up through the trees, it's probably not going to be a particular issue for it because it wouldn't get enough sunlight in the wild.
And that's probably because of the cloud cover, then
Yeah.
I presume. Now, habit then, I'm just trying to figure out, is it a twiner? Does it have tendrils? What does it
It's a
do?
twiner. The stems twine their way up the support.
Oh, yeah.
So it doesn't have any tendrils or anything on it. So it needs things that are thin enough for it to wind its way around and work its way up. So wire, a shrub, a metal tripod. There's a wide range of things you could use to grow it on. They can actually make substantial pot plants actually that can last for donkey's years in a big pot. So you could have one of those sort of tripods that people often sell for climbing tomatoes on, and run it up one of those supports, and it could work really well for years and years and years.
Ah, interesting. I do love when things can be a potted specimen. Now, climatic conditions then. So extremes of heat and cold.
No. Because it comes from those sort of damp, cool, but moist forests of southern Chile, it would probably get a little bit of snow in the winter, but they wouldn't get much frost. So they can go down to quite low temperatures, but they don't like being actually frosted per se. So they're not a good outdoor plant in many parts of Britain and North America.
Although Alexandra of the Middle-Sized Garden points out her garden only goes to about -6 degrees centigrade. I forget what she says, that's Fahrenheit 21 or something. So maybe in southeastern England.
Oh yes, you could grow it in Cornwall, parts of that area
Southwest.
would be southwest, yes, or anywhere along the Gulf Stream where they're almost frost-free is possible. Certainly, you can grow them in Ireland. I've seen them outdoors in Ireland and grown there. So so keep the moisture up to them. In hot weather, syringe the foliage to keep it cool.
Syringe it?
Yeah,
What do you mean?
with water.
Oh, hose it, Stephen.
No, you don't.
Syringe.
No, well, exactly. You don't want to necessarily whack it with heavy water out of the watering can or out of the hose. But if you dampen the foliage down, it keeps the humidity up around the plant.
Okay, syringe your...
Yes, you can syringe your Lapagerias. And then it's basically a matter of training and just keeping them going in the direction you want them to grow in, and be patient. They're not a plant that are fast growing, nor are they hugely fence covering.
All right, well, you've got one growing by your office over there. So let's go and talk about how and where you could grow it. Now that we've figured out it needs bright light, no direct sun, moist but not wet root run.
Yeah.
Something to grow it over, but it's not dripping in flowers. Let's go and talk about where you could grow it.
What a good idea. All right, well, I thought it would be a very good idea if we ran through some of the different forms of Lapageria that I've managed to get into my collection. Unfortunately, I can't show the ones I lost, but anyhow, of course, we've got the wild form, Lapageria rosea, so that's a fairly classical wild plant. Dark cherry red, white spotted inside, and just the most beautiful thing. Anyway, I'd be really happy if I only had that one, I have to say. Then we've got the whites. Now, this is just a seedling white that I paid vast amounts of money for way back when. And this one is the selected white with its extra long trumpets. And it actually has, you probably can't see it terribly well, but it has almost a greenish stripe down the outside of the petals. And that's the one called Toqui. So that's a beautiful white, and this one's just Alba. Then we have the rose pink forms. Now, these are actually two different selections, so you can see they were fairly keen on minute detail. But this one here is one that is called Rosado Fuerte, which means pink. And this one is one called Angol, which is probably the biggest flowered of the mid-rose pink cultivars that are available. And Angol is the name of the town where the nursery is that started this selection process from the wild. So it's sort of the epicenter for visiting Lapagerias if you're going to Chile. So you can see them growing in the nursery called Albergel, the garden. So it's beautiful, the lovely pale pink ones. And I have two bicolours of the three that I've actually ever seen. This one here is Colibri with its beautiful white bell with the dark cerise edges, and it just sort of blends up into the trumpet a little bit. So it's a really, really interesting flower form. So that's Colibri. And the other one that's a bicolour that I've got is this one here, which is a lovely white, and it's got sort of plum, almost reptilian scaly-like effect on the flowers. And this one's called Nulla, and I apologise if I've mangled the word, but it's a national park near Angol where I went to visit the fantastic monkey puzzle trees. So this one's named after the nearby national park. So that's Nulla. So they're the different forms I have in my collection as it stands at the moment.
Well, they were quite beautiful, but so we've discovered it's a prima donna.
Yeah.
We've discovered they're all one species with a huge variety of colour. We've discovered that they only thrive in a very narrow bandwidth of conditions.
Yeah.
So if your garden met with all those conditions, where would you plant them? Is it going to be a dense creeper? Could you use it as a screen?
No.
Okay.
Definitely not. I've very rarely seen Lapageria big enough and dense enough to actually work as a screen or fence cover or whatever.
Yeah.
So you plant them in smallish spaces and you use them for their flowers basically alone. So it's all about the blooms, and it's really not so much a matter of using them in the garden for a specific purpose. It's more about finding all the right conditions for them and growing them just because they have such exquisitely beautiful flowers.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's sort of, it's all about making it happy, not about it being useful in the garden.
But, so it needs a cool, moist root run. Now, the smaller white one that you've got here, now that is growing in amongst wisteria and, what is this called again?
Oh, the silver vein creeper, yes.
Which we have in many videos. So there's a tree, so there's all sorts of things going on in here, and it's sort of just finding its way through.
Yeah, exactly.
It's accidental, I guess.
Yeah, it's not, you're right, it's not very purposeful. It's just where it is. Now, it's in the right aspect, although there's other things growing nearby. The actual trunk of the wisteria, the trunk of the silver vein creeper, the trunk of the tree are all well back from the Lapageria's roots. The only thing that's close is the little weeping maple in the front of it. So it's got its own space. It's quite close to one of my shade houses, so it actually gets borrowed water as it flows through from watering the pots in the shade house. So it's always got plenty of moisture, so I don't actually have to specifically remember to water it. And yes, it's just in there as a happy accident, something that you discover as you walk around the garden.
So I think that's the point for me. They are flowers that you stumble across. It's not like, say, a clematis, which is, woo, it's all colour and massive blooms. It is something that I don't know, your eye just suddenly picks out. And then when you see these flowers, which I have to show again,
Yes, yes.
because they are so enormous and colourful and beautiful, your eye catches them, but they're not everywhere and they're not that conspicuous. So
yeah. So there you go.
it's a subtle and beautiful thing. Well, now I think we need to talk about the evil face of capitalism and actually propagation and cost. You have alluded to the cost of them in the 80s. Let's just go and talk more about that.
What a good idea.
All right, Stephen, something perhaps that we don't often, or sometimes we allude to, and that is the price of things, which is very much tied to propagation, is it not?
Oh yes, and certainly in the case of Lapageria, it definitely is tied to propagation. One can raise Lapageria from seed, and I've got one of the seed pods here, and just in passing I'll mention that the pulp in the seed pods is edible, so you can actually eat Lapageria fruit, so there you go.
Okay.
Something extra. But they won't produce viable seed unless you've got two cross-pollinating forms. So if you had two that were raised from vegetatively from the same plant, they're not going to cross-pollinate each other.
I see, because they're the same plant.
They're basically the same plant. So you need to have two cross-pollinating forms for it to set seed. When you get your seed pods, you take the seed out once it's fully ripe. This one's not quite a ripe pod yet. It'll start going slightly yellowy brown when it's ripe. Yep. So you then take the seed out. Now the way I deal with the seed, it's sticky and gelatinous inside, so I eat the pulp and spit out the seeds, and that way I can get the seeds clean.
Oh my goodness, that's
so there you go. But
funny and quite repulsive.
No, it's all right. You'd spit out seeds of other things. It's just that I happen to sow them afterwards. Now, I have to say, if you're raising Lapageria from seed, because you're using two clones to cross-pollinate, if you use two white clones and cross-pollinate, then the vast majority of the seedlings will turn out to be white, but there's no absolute guarantee from seed. And that's where the issue comes up. If they're seedling raised plants, they'll often throw back to the wild red form, even if they've come from a white parent. It's very possible they'll throw back to red. So you can't guarantee colour with seedlings. And the seedlings will take probably 4, maybe 5 years to flower.
So that was going to be the other question. Firstly, how easy is it to germinate? And then secondly, the time frame.
Well, they're easy enough to germinate, but they germinate and they come up, and then they often just sit there and sulk for months and months on end before they start to send up a proper shoot from the base. And so it's a slow process to grow them from seed, and there's no guarantee of the finished product in a way.
So cuttings?
No. You can't grow Lapageria from cuttings at all.
Oh.
Or at least nobody has ever managed to grow them. I will preface it with that. Lots of nurseries have tried to grow them from cuttings. Once or twice I've had people tell me they've done it, but they've never been able to prove it. The only way to vegetatively propagate Lapagerias and therefore be able to guarantee the colour, and in fact in the case of these ones that I've got here, guarantee the clonal name, is by layering.
Oh, okay.
So you serpentine layer. So you take a branch like this, you pin it down into a pot, and then you can go further along and you can pin the next one down into a pot as well. So you can go like that, and you can end up with quite a number of plants being formed from the one long stem that you've created. It will take 18 months, 2 years to start producing roots. So it can take 2 years or more before you've got a small independent plant.
Wow.
Then you've got to grow it on long enough for it to be something that you've got a good root system under, that you can then sell on to the public or plant out or do whatever you want.
Oh my goodness. So, viewers, this might give you an indication as to why some things are just really expensive.
Yep.
And actually, we've got your price here, which is $82.50. You were saying in the 80s, though, the single white
just to
form,
get a known white was $50 back in the 80s.
which, you know, 40 years ago. So with inflation, I don't know, it's $1,000.
Yeah, well, it should be. And in fact, I might actually put the price up thinking about it.
Now, next thing is then, so let's say you've gone through all this process, or you've bought one. How old is this plant?
Well, that became independent from its original parent, because this one's a layer.
Oh, right.
Became independent about 12 months ago. So it's probably taken me 2.5 years to get to this point, and it's now starting to send some strong, vigorous growth at last.
Now, once it gets to this point, strong, vigorous growing, how long until it sort of gets some height and starts to flower?
How long is a piece of string?
Oh,
It,
okay.
it can vary so much. I wouldn't like to be held to account if a Lapageria doesn't in fact do exactly what I'd said. So it takes time,
Yeah.
but they build a bit of vigour as they go along. I have to say, with the one proviso, all the new shoots come from the root system. They don't come from the original part of the growth.
Yeah.
So that's a shoot that's originated back from the root system of the plant.
Down here.
And that's where all your strong growth will come from. And that's exactly why they're at great risk from bugs and pests and things, because they come up from below ground level. And just when they're breaking the surface, that's just when a marauding snail will come along to get their own back on the Empress Josephine and eat her.
Now, if you do have your shoot eaten, will that shoot, is that shoot done?
Pretty well. If it's eaten near ground level, it will need to start a new one from the root system again. So it can set your plant back, and if it happens often enough, you can actually stunt a Lapageria and it will just never break out of it.
Right.
So you do have to watch out for that particular pest. There's two real pests, slugs and snails, and they're very prone to red spider mite on the foliage if they aren't humid enough around the leaves.
Right.
So if you've got them under a roof, then you do need to have the foliage wet regularly, because otherwise red spider mite tends to set in.
There we are. Wow. So we have covered Lapageria from A to B and
back
even
again.
and to Z even.
Yeah.
Ending up with the fact that that is why it is reasonably expensive. Well, it's been wonderful. Let's hold up more of the flowers because they are so beautiful.
Ah, yes.
How can we possibly trump these gorgeous blooms next week, Stephen?
We won't, but we'll be
Let's
off.
try.
We'll be off on an adventure of some other sort next week, I'm sure. But I just felt that Lapageria as a plant, because of its interesting background, because of its importance in Chile, because of its interesting cultural requirements, deserved a video on its own.
It certainly does. And look at them. Goodness me, they are so beautiful. And as we've said before, you've got a lot of Chilean plants. It's it's a country with some extraordinary flora.
It is, and fortunately, living in the coolish area that I live in, I can grow a fair percentage of them, which is fabulous.
Well, there you go. Well, if you want to know what we are trying to do next week to trump these gorgeous flowers, you'll have to hit subscribe. We post every Friday, so do follow our continuing adventures.
And of course, I will answer people's questions on a Monday in our shorts. So please put your questions in the comment below, and don't forget to tell me where you're from. It helps a lot when I'm answering a question.
It does indeed. So until then, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.